Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's OVA Overview. And as usual, I'd like to open with a question. What is love? And I'm not just asking this to reference an SNL meme that died long ago, but because today's feature is something that's actually a romance piece. That's right, we're talking about Kasei Yakyoku. I'm pretty sure I mispronounced that incorrectly, but for the two people in the audience that might know what I'm talking about Nightsong of Splendor, one of the most emotionally impactful things I've watched in a very long time. At least in terms of density, like emotional feels per second, this thing is freaking high. As you can probably tell by the way that I'm speaking, this is one of the first times that something has made me go straight from credits to recording. Usually I take notes, write a script or whatever. No, this thing is so impactful I wanted to get my visceral live action response to what was a surprisingly amazing lost obscure anime memory. Now, for some context, this is an OVA from 1989, and I think it's pretty obvious from the styling and the fact that I don't think this is an official translation that I watched, but it just encapsulates so many things of 80s anime that are just so stunning. Sometimes when I watch or record things for this channel, I will see like suggested videos and whatnot, and for some reason this still shot of two women in a poorly lit room that we see in the first like minute of episode 1 really caught my eye, especially when I saw a title that was in Japanese. I looked into it, I figured out that the translation is Nightsong of Splendor, and this one thumbnail led me to watching this just amazing piece of art, and that is truly what this piece is, and we'll get into that of course more. But praise for this series, because I don't watch a lot of romance stuff. I'm not really a romance guy, not really my cup of tea, but I am a character guy, and there are some great character writings in this, some not so great, but definitely some that are pretty great. And I surprisingly, I loved this piece. Alright everyone, I've calmed down, I've taken some time to drink some water, and jot down a few notes about this excellent piece. Now, Nightsong of Splendor is one of the most obscure things I've ever tackled on this channel. In fact, it's so obscure it doesn't even have a Wikipedia page for the movie, and I don't even think the source material, so my condolences if I don't get everything correct. That, of course, says nothing of its quality, as I hope the rambling intro to this video proves that I think this 1989 OVA is an amazing title, a truly hidden gem. Coming off the mid that was Megazone 23 Part 3, Nightsong of Splendor is a passionate and well-written display of how a clean execution and relatively tight writing and clever planning can make a small budget go a long way in conveying a captivating tale. In both a production and a writing sense, the execution is pretty awesome here, and kept me surprisingly engaged throughout. I was not expecting to get so hyped from a romance piece, and yet here we are as I gush over its interesting plot beats and character arcs. Now, to understand these, of course, we will need the faintest inkling of a plot summary, so I'll attempt to do that as quickly as possible. Nightsong of Splendor follows the love trapezoid between Akiko, Sara, Taka, and Kiyokuni, four 20-somethings living in 1923 Tokyo. Remember that specific year, it's relevant later. Anyways, Akiko and Kiyokuni are members of the upper crust, arranged to marry each other. Sara is a working-class maid and friend of Akiko, and Taka is a Yakuza member who meets the two women in a chance encounter. We open on this shot which inspired the thumbnail of this video, which is what got me to watch this great OVA. In it, Akiko laments to Sara that the nature of arranged marriages is so constrictive, and how she is very limited in how she can live her life because her husband has already been decided for her. She hates the constraints of the upper class, and envies Sara for being, quote, poor and free, in the sense that she doesn't have to abide by the rules of an arranged marriage. Akiko simply wants to live her own life and pursue who she finds interesting. She meets this interesting man when she and Sara are being accosted by some thugs in a bad part of town. When this happens, Taka steps in and beats them up on behalf of Sara's brother. This display is so amazing and dominant that Akiko instantly falls in love with this man and conspires to set Sara up with Kiyokuni. She hopes that this will placate both of them and also give herself a valid reason to break off her arranged marriage. She hopes to do this at a party where she will disguise Sara as herself while she sneaks off to meet Taka for a date. All of this fails though when A, Taka stands her up at the restaurant, and B, Kiyokuni refuses to sleep with Sara out of respect for his engagement and just how awkward the situation is. A situation that's so awkward, in fact, that Sara resigns so that she can live a quote less artificial life. This sees her work as a waitress in a house of prostitution. However, she herself is the one woman spared from the actual prostitution, as Taka himself personally claims her without her knowing. He does this because his interactions with her up until this point have impressed upon him her modest and honest nature, something he doesn't see a lot in the criminal world and something that's really stuck out to him. He's taken a liking to her by this point and admires her diligence and desires to be dependent on no one. This liking is so strong, in fact, that he even rescues her from a human trafficker that tries to kidnap her, and eventually Sara starts to warm up to this man she once thought was nothing more than a thug. Beating up pimps comes at a cost though, and Taka's doing of so gets him in the hot water with the Yakuza boss, who sends him on a trip to essentially abandon him and sell him up the river. Oh yeah, and between all this we also get a few intermittent scenes of Kiyokuni simping for Akiko, and Akiko being extremely distressed that the guy she shared a total of 87 words with rejected her. But anyways, cutting back to the interesting story. Long story short, Sara tracks Taka down on his business trip, and the two finally admit their feelings for each other and resolve to run away and get married. Before they can do this though, Sara's brother is kidnapped by the evil pimp and must be rescued. This is harder than it sounds though, as the Yakuza boss is so furious with Taka, his initial chosen successor, would run off with Sara instead of choose the Yakuza, that he orders him killed instead. Taka is hunted not only by the pimp, but also the entire gang landscape of Tokyo and Japan. Luckily though, he does rescue Sara's brother while Sara waits at the railway station for their train to depart from Tokyo. However, while she's waiting, the Great Kanto Earthquake of 1923, there's that year again, hits, and the two are separated in the wreckage of the natural disaster. Both survive, but now homeless, Sara has to live with relatives in a different town, and Taka is forced to lie low in Kobe as rival Yakuza groups still hunt for his head. Several months pass, and while the two continue to seek each other, it grows less and less likely, and the two start to slowly accept that. Meanwhile, Akiko and Kiyokuni have finally gotten married by this point, and Akiko is still miserable. That is until she is told by a man paid off by Taka that Taka died in the Great Earthquake of 1923, and for some reason this false story of Taka's death gives Akiko complete closure, and she now resolves to be the best wife ever for Kiyokuni. Kiyokuni, meanwhile, accidentally runs into Taka while on a business trip in Kobe, and, as a sign of trust and respect in Akiko, tells her that Taka is actually still alive and has boarded a ship for Shanghai. It's been several months since he's seen Sara, and having lived under so much pressure from the Yakuza gangs, he resolves that it's best if he just turns over a new leaf and starts a new life in Shanghai, saying that he'll find Sara one day, even though I don't think that's gonna happen. This news, though, undoes all of Akiko's closure, and she literally runs off in the night to board a ship for Shanghai to go stalk Taka. Now distraught and drinking in public, Kiyokuni meanders around town for a bit, and happens to run into Sara, who's also waiting for someone, as they put it. That, of course, is Taka. While Kiyokuni doesn't tell her that Taka is in Shanghai, he does state that he understands what it's like to be someone waiting for someone else, someone who realistically will not or cannot return. As such, he asks Sara if she would like someone to wait with in the meantime, and the two clasp hands. Essentially, both of them realize that their first options are basically gone, and that they've decided that they're going to move on with their own lives and make decisions for themselves at this point. Having kind of been swept off their feet by the events previously and deciding that maybe they should walk their own path together. Now, this is a rather odd twist ending, though I'm honestly pretty okay with it for the reasons that it is surprisingly realistic. I mean, this does seem like something you hear about in real life more than actual productions, and because I honestly didn't see it coming. It's been a while since a twist really got me, and it really got me here. I'm honestly impressed that none of the four main characters died, and I kind of really like that they didn't just go for the generic tragic death, all the while not necessarily going for the stereotypical fairy tale ending. Nightsong of Splendor is an excellent example of 80s anime on a budget, as it has both the hallmark looks of an 80s anime, with its realistic and detailed styles, and the construction needed to really get the most out of a limited budget. If you like 80s anime stylings, or simply want to see a great example of some, this is a really great piece to watch, as while it isn't the highest budget all the time, it's never sloppy, and there's even a great amount of flowing action shots showing that the animators were really talented when actually allowed to go all out. Even in the normal scenes though, the animation is never clunky or bizarre, and it feels simply solid in some of the best ways possible. The setting work is also great, and it does a really good job of blending Japan's past and present in a way reminiscent of the Taisho era. It feels like we're seeing a Japan that, while modern, is still in the process of modernizing, and there's even some social commentary on the idea of the new woman and Japan's social evolution during this time period. Oddly enough, though, while I am a big fan of the animation, and I do think this piece does a relatively good job as a period piece, what impresses me most about it was the stills. Even though I love all of the animation here, throughout the piece I couldn't help but love the especially numerous and intense stills littered throughout. Every single one of them is gorgeous, and every single one of these dynamic frames is placed in a place of maximal impact. And I love how dynamic these singular frames can be and the impact that we get from switching from flowing animation to a still that's drawn in a slightly different method with slightly different colors. What impresses me more though is how and when they are used. The animation team was really smart using these stills enough to feel normal, but not enough to feel cheap or overused. The presence of great action scenes throughout lets us know that the animation team was great, and that these stills are used mostly for cost and time purposes, and are not simply cheap or lower effort filter. They and their employment are proof of clever resource allocation as well, and that resource management can overcome a lot of budget issues, and this is an excellent great bang for your buck OVA. Even the OST embodies this, as I think it's literally 3 songs, a single sting, and some public domain stuff, and yet it feels very natural, and I especially love the incorporation of public domain stuff into actual scenes. These kind of little forefall moments are things I simply love. It's stuff like hearing Dance Macabre in the background, only for it to pause while Akiko flips over the record in the actual scene. Stuff like that is a great touch, and it really integrates the soundtrack not only into our viewing experiences, but also into the world that we're watching occur. I think one of the reasons the show gets so much mileage out of its relatively humble budget and OST, though, is because of its pacing. When I discovered that this mysterious OVA was a romance piece, I did have some doubts at first, but I figured it would still be neat to watch in a kind of campy way. I expected a slowish and melodramatic tale, more interesting for its camp than its actual content. And that couldn't be further from the truth, as the pacing in Nightsong of Splendor is phenomenal. It gets us right into things and never lets off the gas, and yet it's logical and structured enough where it never feels rushed or stupid. One thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, in such a natural way that even the smattering of great action scenes are woven very naturally into the fabric of the story. I want to say completely unironically that this romance OVA has more and higher quality action scenes than Megazone 23 Part 3, something that's marketed as an action piece. I just want to restate that this is a romance piece that also just happens to have Japanese lemro beating up thugs in alleyways. In fact, the action scenes always feel perfectly placed, and they do speed up the pace just a little bit every now and again, although again not to the point of being rushed. They add a sense of physical stakes and danger to the emotional ones present, all the while feeling very logical and well placed. Even the time skips work, as while they do feel a little weird here and there, the story still never feels rushed in spite of a relatively brisk pace, and the fact that it does cover several months. And all of this pacing masterpiece is a great example of how a creative team that stays focused on the goal can get there in a timely and efficient manner, all the while expressing an excellent story. This story is not one that should be taken lightly though, and on a more serious note, I do think it important to briefly warn viewers that this OVA doesn't pull many punches with its content. I don't usually give warnings about violence, however, I do think that when it comes to sexual violence, warnings should be made. As while I have no issues with the tasteful romance scenes, even if I don't really care for that stuff in TV, I do think it important to warn that there are some more graphic scenes of sexual violence in this piece. Now, these scenes are woven into the story in a way that makes logical sense, and luckily they don't go all the way, but they're still graphic and disturbing and upsetting enough that I understand if they do upset people that might be watching this, and I feel it important to caution all you potential OVA viewers. There is still some graphic and upsetting stuff that should not be made light of. And to the series' credit, none of the acts of violence are made light of. And we do understand that this was a dangerous time period to be a woman, and fortunately, the violence here doesn't go all the way that it could, if you know what I'm saying. I'm pretty sure you know what I'm talking about. Just wanted to caution you all out there and say that I do understand that there are some heavy moments in this series. However, to the series' credit, it doesn't necessarily make light of them. and it does seem to make some kind of effort to warn people of these things. Finally, we get to the characters. Starting with Kiyokuni, this guy seems to be the embodiment of the stereotypical noble gentleman. He's loyal and patient to a fault, and believes very highly in his own morality. That's not to say that he's preachy, but that he holds himself to his moral compass very strongly. Whether it's sticking to his arranged marriage out of a sense of obligation, he fears that it's needed to maintain his family's wealth, status, and honor, something which is unironically implied to be true near the end, or denying the chance for an affair with a woman he has chemistry with at the beginning of the series, even after being told to do so by both that woman and his fiancée. Kiyokuni definitely seems to be a man rooted in principles, and while he is a big-time simp, I can respect the idea of a man that lives by some code of personal honor. And I even respect his massive honesty, as this guy has the guts to straight up tell Akiko that Taka's alive, in an attempt to establish that he completely trusts her. And while this does kind of backfire because she leaves in the middle of the night, to be fair, it also gives him an out to his crappy marriage. On the topic of which, let's get to Akiko. Now, Akiko is borderline unhinged, and as I can't really tell if they were going for unhinged or that just sort of happened. Either way, I'm glad that Sara becomes the main character, as Akiko is kind of out of touch, naive, and stubborn. She seeks to finally live for herself, which is deeply ironic considering how she dedicates her life to stalking a man that has no interest in her. She's only got a very vague and idealized sense of love, and it's obvious she understands neither how the real world or real people work. This sets up a woman who will blindly pursue impulses simply to satiate her vague hunger, as opposed to actually planning stuff out, or taking others into consideration, or actually mapping out her own feelings. In all honesty, Akiko kind of comes off as entitled, and somewhere between kind of dumb and kind of mean-spirited. She tries to use Sara to further her own goals, and she cannot take no for an answer. These are her key traits, and essentially set up the entirety of the OVA, and as such I think it appropriate that she gets, at least to me, the least happy ending. I mean, Kiyokuni and Sara get each other. Taka gets a clean slate and gets to hang out with his bud Junichiro. What does Akiko get? She gets a vague tip and a 2% chance to run into a man that she wants nothing to do with her in a foreign country. Woof. I also think it important to briefly note that I don't know if this character is supposed to be a commentary on the idea of the new woman that was arising in the Taisho era of Japan, and, the world in general in the 1920s. I can't tell if she's supposed to be a commentary on that because she's a woman who wants to escape her arranged marriage and make her own life, or if she's some kind of caricature of that, because while she does pursue these noble goals, she also does so in a very illogical manner and seems to be completely controlled by passion and emotion. I don't know if this is a clumsy attempt at portraying the new woman or some kind of attempt at satirizing it. I honestly can't tell from the execution, and I just thought I would note that real quick. And that leads us to talking on Taka, as what I initially feared to be the stereotypical too cool for emotions and romance type actually turns out to be a relatively well-developed character with a sick suit and some good life advice. In fact, this Lemuro lookalike is one that is surprisingly sensitive, restrained, and wise. Whether it's looking out for Sara or trying to end fights peacefully, it's obvious that this guy is cut from a different cloth than those he's fallen in with, and that there's a lot more to him than just his sick fight moves and cool suit. He is the archetypal rogue that knows how to fight, and yet is guided in his fights by a surprisingly upright moral compass. He doesn't care about the law, but his own code of ethics is sacred. And I love how this is slowly revealed to us through his actions. Actions like the fact that he doesn't kill anyone when he very much could have in his opening fight scene. Actions like how he openly and bluntly rejects Akiko instead of stringing her along or exploiting her for cash. There is no sudden change with Taka, but this line of little actions lead us to seeing how he's evolving as a character, and later how Sara brings out his softer side and repressed emotions and humanity. This is a guy who is not just a cool fighter, but someone who learns to love, and that's really touching seeing how love melts this cold criminal's heart. Oh yeah, and he's also really good at beating people up. All of this leads us to Sara, who I'm pretty sure is the main character of the OVA. Like Taka, Sara has a subtle but very fulfilling arc in which she learns to live for herself. While Taka learns to live for and think of others, Sara learns to live for and think of herself. As a relatively meek character when we first meet her, she puts others before herself to a near fault, and is kind of a pushover. I mean, she literally just went along with Akiko's scheme to have her sleep with her fiancé. And as such, Sara subconsciously limits her own agency when we first meet her. As the story progresses, though, when we see her start to experience more things and start to hang around Taka, we start to see her think for herself more and more, and it's a real moment of character triumph when she runs off of the Tokyo-bound train to spend a night with Taka near the beach, as she's finally learning to think for herself and put herself first to some extent. There is a good through line in this OVA series, as people tell her, look Sara, I know you're not a selfish person and you don't want to be selfish, but sometimes it's okay to think about yourself and value yourself. You gotta live with yourself and for yourself as well as with anyone else. And it is excellent seeing Sara evolve throughout the series, as she's always likable and she's always very kind. By the end of the series, she's still caring and kind, and now has learned the importance of caring for herself in addition to all those around her, cemented by the fact that she finally makes a decision for herself to accept Taka's departure and also Kiyokuni's proposition. She has broken free of her own self-imposed shackles. And this idea of breaking free of personal and social constraints is another aspect of this OVA that is excellently woven into the story itself, as here everyone breaks free of something holding them down in the pursuit of love, and I think it's an inadvertent showing of how love can set one free. Kiyokuni is set free from a loveless show marriage when Akiko leaves him, because he, in an act of love, told her that Taka was still alive. Akiko, in her crazed love, is finally pushed to the point of straight up leaving the environment she hates so much. Taka is freed from his criminal past and emotional repression when his love for Sara makes him realize that maybe there are good people and maybe he can be one of them. And Sara is set free of her inability to live for herself when she finally feels strong enough about something to truly pursue it and take risks in that pursuit. It's touching how everyone is freed in some sort of way, and I want to say that this story is, for lack of a better term, a love letter to the concept of love. I understand that the initial pairings don't work out the way we think they will, but at the end of the day, everyone pursues love in good faith, and it is rewarding to them in a lot of ways that, even if not necessarily what we thought might be, are still impactful and meaningful. I also find it very ironic that an OVA that features so much love at first sight instantly got me with its vague thumbnail. And love at first sight is an oddly appropriate decision of the passion I felt for this piece. But while I do love talking about weird stuff on this channel, it has been a while since I've seen something that just hits so hard and so consistently. In terms of feels per minute, this is a very dense piece, and I mean that in the best way possible, as Nightsong of Splendor is an overall amazing character piece with enough twists and turns to also get praise for its surprisingly well executed plot. It's simply amazing, and I can't fathom how, for some reason, this is only given a 6 point something or so when you look it up online. No, this is a freaking 9 point something out of 10. This piece is freaking great, and I cannot recommend to you enough that you check out this great, obscure anime memory.